picture this. Your fantasy football league championship trophy is just sitting over there on your shelf. And how did it get there? It's probably because you drafted at least one of the players that is going to be in this video. These guys have the ability to tilt an entire fantasy season because of their talent, opportunity, and overall situation. And we can get into it right away with Jalen Hurts, who there's kind of this narrative around him right now, and it's a little bit bizarre. Like last year was a disappointing season for Jalen Hurts. And if you want to talk about from a real life perspective and what he did as a passer towards the middle to end parts of the season, okay, I guess sure. But from a fantasy standpoint, you probably took him in the third round of your fantasy draft. He finished as the quarterback 6 with 21.3 fantasy points per game. Sure, his passing touchdowns came down, but a reason why, and we're going to get into this, is because Saquon Barkley had one of the most efficient rushing seasons ever, so there was a lot more rushing touchdowns in this offense between both Saquon and Jalen Hurts. I mean, for crying out loud, the Eagles last year led the NFL with 621 rushing attempts. The second team there was the Ravens, a very run-heavy team with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Overall, those guys dominated, and they only had 554. The Eagles literally had nearly 70 more carries than any other team in the league. That is insane. They were averaging over 36 rush attempts per game. So yes, it was a very run-first, a historically run-first offense. And believe it or not, there has only been 2 NFL teams the last 15 years who have ran that much in the season. It was the Jets in 2009 and the Ravens in 2019, so odds are they're going to regress to passing more. Just to kind of nail home this point a little bit more, you had Jalen Hurts last year finishing as a number 6 overall fantasy QB despite throwing just 24 times per game, ranking 22nd in the NFL. That was a massive drop off from the year before where he threw 100 more times. He had 460 pass attempts, so I think we're going to get somewhere in the middle ground there. I think he's going to throw 400 plus times this year. And even with Saquon Barkley there, we already saw last year the rushing for Jalen Hurts was not an issue at all. He still led all quarterbacks with 14 rushing touchdowns. All the guy does is score rushing touchdowns. He ranked 3rd in rushing yards with a very respectable 630, while his running back was rushing for 2,000 plus yards. And that's while he was a little bit banged up as well and they weren't using him as much in the run game. He still ran for over 40 yards per game. To drive this point home even more, you can check out Dynasty Dad over on Twitter. I like this tweet that he found. Over the last 3 seasons from 2022 to 2024, Jalen Hurts is averaging nearly 10 fantasy points per game just rushing. That ranks first amongst quarterbacks. He has almost 2,000 total rushing yards as a quarterback the last 3 years. That is 3rd. And he has 42 rushing touchdowns, easily leads the NFL. He also leads the NFL in deep ball completion percentage. Expected points added on deep balls. Yes, Jalen Hurts does. And let's zoom out and look at not only his overall accounting stats and production, but some of the efficiency metrics as well. Over the past few years, Jalen Hurts ranks 4th amongst all quarterbacks in yards per attempt and top 10 in true passer rating. And during that span, as you can see, Ryan Heath, a great Twitter follow here, says fantasy points per dropback. It's one of the most predictive stats by quarterbacks. I would say it is the best stat overall for quarterbacks. You're going to see a lot of mobile quarterbacks in here. The top 6 in this stat since 2022. Jalen Hurts has had the 2nd best total, only behind Lamar Jackson and barely behind Lamar Jackson. He's been better than Josh Allen on a points per dropback standpoint, better than Jaden Daniels, who's only had 1 year. Brock Purdy's also in this, which makes him a sleeper as well as we get into some of the other videos this offseason. But Jalen Hurts is right up there. He should be in that elite tier, but he goes like 1 to 2 rounds after those guys. And I think the volume's going to come back just from pure regression. I think he's going to throw 40 to 80 to 100 more times this year to the same wide receivers he's been throwing to in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Despite some potential trade rumors around the NFL draft, he's still throwing to Dallas Goedert. This is an offensive line that if we scroll to it, yes, they lose pieces over the past few years, but it's still arguably, if not the best, a top 3 offensive line in the NFL. Cam Jurgens, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson is still there, right? This is a great unit in general. And just so you all know, the tush push, there was a chance. It looked like for a half a day that it was going to be banned. Probably Jalen Hurts' biggest weapon, especially when it comes to, he's probably earning 4 to 6 more touchdowns over the last couple of years because of this. The tush push, a ban on the tush push that Philadelphia Eagles popularized, did not get enough votes in the league meetings in Minneapolis earlier this year. So what does this mean? It means that Jalen Hurts is still going to have all the upside when it comes to those 1-yard carries around the red zone, which happened at like a crazy high rate. I don't think it's going to continue, but I think we're still going to see 1 to 2 to 5 maybe on the upside scale tush push touchdowns for Jalen Hurts. And we should also point out that I think Saquon Barkley is going to have a great year. I think he deserves to be a top 3, if not number 1 overall fantasy pick right around there, but it's not like I can just come out here and say he's going to have another 2,000 rushing yard season. So if Saquon Barkley Barkley's production on the ground just drops a little bit. Maybe that leaves some room as well, not only through the air, but on the ground for Jalen Hurts to see some more production. Right now, we're getting Jalen Hurts in the betting markets projected. His over-unders around 3,200 yards, which is more than what we saw, about 250 more yards than we saw last year. It's about 20 passing touchdowns, which is a little bit more than we saw last year as well. So this is a player that I want to invest in, where you're getting him right now in drafts. We'll talk about it as a 4th round pick because he's finished as the number 1 quarterback, number 2, and in a quote unquote down year where he threw 100 less times last year, he finished 6th overall. I think that regresses. Like I said, he's currently going in the 4th round of drafts, 39th overall. He goes after Jaden Daniels, after Lamar Jackson, after Josh Allen. I'm fine that he goes after those 3 names. It's just the gap. Like, he's going 15 to 20 picks after Lamar and Josh Allen, and I'll just take that value in Jalen Hurts because I believe he can win you your league. And I also believe this next guy up, the tight end David Njoku for the Cleveland Browns, is currently the most underrated tight end in fantasy football, because this guy, every single year, it's like David Njoku gets slept on. Maybe last year he got steamed up to the 8th or 9th round. Maybe that even happens this year once fantasy drafts in late August and September start to kick off more. But what does he do regardless every single year? If it's a bad offense that he's playing with like the past few years, he finishes as a top 8 tight end each of the last 3 seasons, including last year where he did miss time, so it was a smaller sample, but he was actually a top 5 tight end, top 4 if you really want to get into it. And let's talk a little bit more about 2024. We could see it right here. This is a guy who, once he started to get a little bit healthier, once it was like week 6 on, that final parts of the season, the final 9 games, he was averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game. He was averaging nearly 10 targets per game, as you can see right here on RotoViz, 50 receiving yards compared to 29 in the other first couple of games of the year where he was getting back from some injuries. So he was a top 3 tight end during that stretch, up there with like the Brock Bowers of the world, the Trey McBrides, guys who were going literally 8 to 9 rounds earlier than him in fantasy drafts. And during that span, he actually led the team, despite being a tight end, ahead of all the wide receivers, including Jerry Jeudy, with a 23% target share, and he had at least 7 targets in 8 of his final 9 games. So those were like wide receiver 2 numbers, and he also is having success in 2023, despite there still being some bad quarterbacks. This is his splits when Joe Flacco is his quarterback. That's important because Joe Flacco is now back with the Browns, currently projected to be the starter week 1. You can see in the 5 games with Joe Flacco to end the 2023 season, David Njoku was averaging 8.6 fantasy points per game, 9 targets per game, and 78 receiving yards per game. That is absolutely insane. He also had a 9 targets and 78 yards as well, and almost a touchdown in every single game is what he was averaging there. So that's an insane stat log. That's like wide receiver 1 production out of a tight end. Of course, it's a totally different team. It's 2 years later, and Njoku has had some injuries since then, slightly more target competition with Cedric Tillman emerging last year. But just in general, like, yeah, Joe Flacco is now back. We've seen this guy produce every single year. He's been producing like probably a 5th to 8th round tight end, around there, maybe not as high as George Kittle, who goes in the 4th round, but like a mid-round tight end, but he's currently going way later than that. And basically, we saw in 2023, Joe Flacco turned David Njoku into a league winner down the stretch for the fantasy playoffs and fantasy postseason. He was on a high percentage of fantasy championship teams in 2023, and even more impressive is now maybe he's going to get to play with this guy again. David Njoku, if you're not familiar, he's a 250-pound running back who has a just elite speed when it comes to speed score, 81st percentile, burst score, 97th percentile. He's agile, he has strength, he's amazing, he's just like an absolute specimen. You think of like the most just insane looking tight ends or players in the NFL, David Njoku is on like that short list of 10 players. And I bring that up because we see it. That type of just combination of elite size, like top tier DK Metcalf type size and speed, allows him to produce after the catch. Now, the obvious concern for one David Njoku is this quarterback room. We talked about Joe Flacco. Maybe it won't be a concern, although Flacco's now 2 years older. He had like a little bit of a run with the Colts last year, but for the most part was not great. Kenny Pickett, they signed this offseason, probably gets cut because I think they're going to keep Shedeur Sanders. They have to basically keep Deshaun Watson. Probably going to come down to these 2 guys if they keep 4 quarterbacks. So it's not a great situation by any means, but that's kind of already baked into the price point of David Njoku, who like right now, depending on when you're watching this, is going as like a 10th or 11th round fantasy pick. That's insane. Especially when we factor in that this offseason, if anything, his target share should maybe increase. The team lost Elijah Moore, as you can see right here, who was actually a meaningful contributor, was earning like 5 to 7 targets per game during that Jameis Winston stretch last year. All they replaced him with is Deontay Johnson, who knows where Deontay Johnson is right now. Outside of that, no other real starters are going to come in here. So I would say, if anything, maybe even David Njoku's target share with Elijah Moore gone and Deontay Johnson coming in has a chance to increase. Also worth pointing out that Tommy Rees joins as the offensive coordinator for this team right now. Maybe one of the least talked about offensive coordinator changes, because we know that Kevin Stefanski is also going to be very involved in the offense. But this is a guy who in his past has specialized in tight ends, not only in the NFL, as well as with Alabama back in 2023 when they had a very strong tight end room. So as of right now, like David Njoku, he's going as a a 10th round pick, he's probably locked in, as long as he stays somewhat healthy, to 120 plus targets, which no other tight ends in that range probably are. But despite this, he goes as the 113th overall pick right now. I mean, he's going after guys like Keon Coleman, who maybe in year 2 with Buffalo can start to break out, although I'm not too confident in that. He's going after Cam Scatabo, who I like, but he's splitting a backfield. He's going like rounds after Mark Andrews at this point, which feels crazy. We can keep scrolling and you're going to find Travis Kelce eventually will go all the way up in this range. Travis Kelce is going like 3 to 5 rounds earlier, depending on the format you're playing in, than David Njoku, and that just seems insane. Now, let me ask you something quick. Do you ever get to the point in your work week where you just think, I need something to look forward to? For me, that's been checking out Yankees games lately, because there's nothing like being at a stadium, grabbing a beer, and watching Aaron Judge launch a 450-foot home run. Which is why I want to give the sponsor of today's video, SeatGeek, a huge shout out. With over 28 million downloads, they are the #1 rated ticketing app, and for good reason. They've got tickets for over 70,000 events, concerts, sports, festivals, you name it. Now, I love using SeatGeek because they make the whole experience dead simple. I just pop open the app, and what I love is they actually rate every ticket from 1 to 10, so you know if it's a good deal. Green dot equals good and red equals not so much. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and you know that I had to come through for you all. You can use code VETRI10 for 10% off your next set of tickets over on SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets, any amount, when you use code VETRI10 on SeatGeek now. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later on. Thank you, SeatGeek, for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it. Okay, now let's get into Nico Collins, who is maybe one of the most dangerous downfield threats. I mean, he might be the most dangerous downfield threat, depending on the stats and the film that you watch from Nico Collins in the entire NFL. And as of right now, I think you're actually getting a fair price point on this guy. Now, that doesn't mean he's cheap. He's going to go as a late first or early second round pick, but that's completely fine, because last year, Nico Collins was a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. Look at this. This has been back-to-back seasons he's finished as a top 10 wide receiver, despite last year and really the past 2 years dealing with injuries. And last year, when he was actually healthy to start the season, he looked like the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy for those first 4 to 5 to 6 games of the year before suffering his injury. It was a grade 2 hamstring strain, which at minimum is going to keep you out a month. It did for Nico Collins, and it's probably going to linger for up to 2 months. But despite this, he was able to do this right here. Again, finished with 17.6 fantasy points per game, the second straight season, both seasons with CJ Stroud as his quarterback, with over 17 fantasy points per game. And if you want to look at the efficiency, I mean, despite being injured for maybe half of the season with that hamstring, missing time, and lingering, he finished top 5 in yards per route run last year. That's great. He was averaging nearly 84 receiving yards per game. All of that is fantastic. And like I just mentioned, early on in the season, this dude was putting up historic numbers, because from weeks 1 through 4, he was averaging 122 yards per game and 11 targets per game. That was a pace of over 2,000 yards and 128 catches. It might have been the best wide receiver season of all time. Now, of course, that's just being a little bit crazy, because it's really hard to keep up those outlier 4-week samples for the entire year. But the point is, he was putting that level of production up. He has the ability to do so, and now his competition is probably even weaker, because as of right now, there's no Tank Dell this season. He's dealing with injuries. Stefon Diggs is gone. His biggest competition is going to be Christian Kirk, who signed a 1-year deal, most likely will operate as a slot receiver for this team in 3 wide receiver sets, will compete with Jaden Higgins, a rookie who's having a good, or had a good OTAs and minicamp. They'll compete for the number 2 job on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets. Outside of that, though, like another rookie in Jalen Noel will compete for slot snaps, I assume, but it's basically just Nico Collins. If your biggest competition is a somewhat journeyman slot wide receiver in Christian Kirk, who I do like relative to his skill set, but he's there brand new, doesn't have a connection to the offense or CJ Stroud, and then a couple of rookies, yeah, Nico Collins I feel good about, especially when we compare it to Tank Dell being the competition last year and Stefon Diggs, right? This is just kind of a little bit of a glimpse of that. As you can see right here, this is the team changes tracker. It's in my fantasy blueprint. You could check it out if you want, with all the other draft and in-season tools and ability to ask me questions in the Discord. It's at jointheblueprint.com. But outside of just some of these moves, like we said at the wide receiver room, there's not really much else that was added here in terms of competition. Braxton Berrios, Nick Chubb to the backfield. The biggest concern is probably going to just be this offensive line in general. It is going to look like, if not the worst offensive line in the league this year, one of the 3 or 5 worst, which could hurt your downfield passing as an offense. But here's the thing. Nico Collins was already dealing with this last year, and check this out. Average separation scores on horizontal breaking routes, those are your outs and digs. Nico Collins and Brian Thomas and Josh Downs were the biggest vertical threats in the entire league. So again, Nico Collins, I mentioned it right when we started talking about him, maybe the most dangerous vertical threat in the league. You also also think about Ja'Marr Chase, although teams are playing a lot more cover 2 defenses against the Bengals now. It was literally Nico Collins last year based on separation on vertical routes, and that was while having a bad offensive line, and he was still able to produce downfield. Behind that bad offensive line, he was still able to have 8.3 targets per game, and this is skewed based on a game that he left early in his first game back where he was somewhat limited, a 25% target share, which is borderline number 1 receiver numbers, and he led the NFL in explosive play rate of generating plays of 20 plus yards behind a bad offensive line that he'll have again this year. So I recognize that's a concern, but he already did it with a bad offensive line last year. Maybe just somehow it can get better. Nico Collins is like your prototypical X wide receiver in the NFL. He's 6'4", 215 pounds, maybe like the perfect size. Okay, 220 would maybe be a little bit more ideal. You're talking about speed, catch radius, all these things are amazing for his size. 90th percentile speed score according to Player Profiler. Burst is 75th percentile. This is why he can win downfield pretty often. He was top 5 in separation against man and zone coverage last year, both of those. The only downsides besides the offensive line piece that we talked about would be the thing that held him back last year, and that's his injuries. We don't like seeing these soft tissue injuries for guys like Nico Collins, and last year he suffered too. A minor hamstring strain that he ended up retweaking, and this was the grade 2 one right here that kept him out for about a month, lingered for about 2 months in total. In 2023, we also saw he had a calf strain, he had a foot sprain in 2022, a groin strain. So every single year he's dealt with some injuries, and that's kind of what you're going to get when you're a bigger, explosive wide receiver on the outside. The hope would be that they're only minor. They're minor hamstring tweaks that at most keep you out for 1 week, and they don't end up lingering into these grade 2 hamstring, grade 2 knee strains that last a couple of months. But for the most part, we could say this for every single wide receiver. These big, fast guys who are on the outside playing violently and having quick cuts, yes, sometimes they're going to get hamstring injuries. Fingers crossed it doesn't happen again for Nico Collins this year. That's the only thing to really point out here. Because as DraftKings has it right now in the betting markets, Nico Collins is projected for one of the highest receiving over-unders right now of over 1,100 total yards, which is just absolutely insane. It's one of the highest, like I mentioned. He's projected for 6.5 touchdowns. His receiving yards right now, the only guys with higher total prop numbers for the year are right now Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. He's in that tier of elite wide receivers in terms of what Vegas thinks he's going to produce this year. And you get him at a slight discount compared to those guys who are all go in the top 5 or 6 fantasy picks. Nico Collins goes as pick number 12. You can honestly be in a world where you land Christian McCaffrey and Nico Collins, and there's a world where these guys end up as the running back 1 and wide receiver 1 in fantasy. I'd be taking Nico Collins right now over Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's a coin flip depending on your scoring settings with Ashton Genty. In full point PPR, give me Nico Collins. I'd be taking him over Brian Thomas, definitely, since Thomas has to compete with Travis Hunter. And at this point, look, it's Nico Collins as a top 10 pick in fantasy with the upside of literally being the wide receiver 1 overall. We just saw it for the first month when healthy last year. And we also saw like top 5 to top 3 upside out of Kenneth Walker when he was healthy last year. And now he's entering arguably the best situation of his entire career. Now look, 2024, I mentioned how there was like a stretch where he looked like one of the best running backs in fantasy, but it was a bit of a roller coaster because of the injuries. Overall, he finished as a running back 1 for the first time in his career with 16.5 fantasy points. He continued to score right around his 8 or 9 touchdowns per year. All of those things are great. He was doing this while, if we look at his touches per game, very strong overall. 14 carries per game, almost 5 targets per game, which is a massive jump that we have to get more into. He was seeing about 19 opportunities per game. And like I mentioned, he finished overall as a top 12 running back last year, but his expected fantasy points based on where he was getting touches, where he should have finished, was actually as the running back 6 overall in fantasy. And that was behind a terrible offensive line. He was just seeing such high volume touches in terms of targets and red zone usage. But as I kind of hinted at, what really popped last year in year 3 for Kenneth Walker was the way that they used him as a receiver. This is not the stat based on his first 2 seasons where you thought you would see Kenneth Walker. 2024 leaders in design targets per game. Okay, Devon Achane stepped up. You expect that. You expect Alvin Kamara. Rashad White is an underrated pass catcher. You expect Aaron Jones, but Kenneth Walker was 6th on the list, tied for 5th with Bucky Irving with 1.4 design targets per game at the running back position. I mean, again, the first 2 years, this guy was like only a rusher only, maybe catches 20 balls. Completely changed in year 3 last year. He averaged nearly 5 targets per game through the first 9 weeks, and he was on pace, if he would have stayed healthy, to catch 63 balls and over 400 receiving yards, which would have doubled his previous career high. So the question might be, then why didn't he produce as much besides the injuries? Why wasn't he as efficient on the ground? And I think a lot of that's to do with their offensive line. PFF ranked them 24th overall in run blocking, a bottom 10 unit last year. They had the 3rd worst running back yards before contact. They allowed a pressure rate at a bottom of the league 39% for their quarterback quarterbacks, Geno Smith. That's why he was so inconsistent, struggling to throw downfield last year at times. It was one of, if not the worst offensive lines in the NFL. But despite this, Kenneth Walker came out and he still led all NFLs. He was the most elusive running back in the NFL. Missed tackles forced per carry. Kenneth Walker was number 1 in the NFL. You remember how just dynamic Bucky Irving was, how good obviously every year Derrick Henry is, how amazing Bijan Robinson is. Kenneth Walker led all of these guys while dealing with some injuries and while just dealing with time and time again guys breaking through into the backfield because his offensive line stunk. He was producing on his own nonstop breaking tackles. And now maybe this year the offensive line gets a little bit better. I mean, they spent a first round pick on a guard, Greg Zabel. We would hope that that helps. They added Josh Jones in free agency. We would hope that that helps compared to some of the pieces that they had last year. But the honest truth is, just look at how much stuff that they've done this offseason. This team changes tracker, like compared to some other teams in their division. The Rams, okay, they did some moves. The Cardinals basically did nothing on offense. These are all offensive moves in the Fantasy Blueprint. Again, join theblueprint.com. The prices do increase and there are limited spots left this year due to the high demand. You can check it out, link down below. Help you win your league, smack around your friends. But right here, they did so many things this offseason. One of those was trying to improve the offensive line. Another one was adding a new offensive coordinator in Klint Kubiak, who I do think is very interesting because he loves getting his running backs involved in the passing game. You could look at what he did with Alvin Kamara last year, continued to be a dominant force in the passing game. And you could see right here a quote. This was earlier this offseason, according to the Coach Speak Index on Twitter. Klint Kubiak wanted to talk about his outside zone running scheme and throwing the ball to running backs in Kenneth Walker. He said, looking forward to get him in this scheme, and we're going to ask a lot out of him this year. So, of course, Zach Charbonnet is still in this backfield, but Kenneth Walker proved last year he can catch passes, and now he has an offensive coordinator that specifically wants to use running backs on outside zones. Kenneth Walker's a perfect fit. And in the passing game, great news for Kenneth Walker. It's also worth pointing out that a lot of this offense is like completely different, right? DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are gone. They've been there for years. Geno Smith has been a staple piece of this offense for the past couple of years, right? These guys are gone, being replaced with Sam Darnold, Cooper Kupp, MVS. It's like a whole new offense. The only things that kind of stay stable in this offense as far as starters go is Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's been in the offense the past few years, and Kenneth Walker. So in terms of like knowing the playbook, feeling comfortable in the offense, the other coaches on this staff knowing these guys, Kenneth Walker is like right up there, if not the leader in terms of being a veteran on this team and somebody that the team trusts. And it's also worth pointing out that his quarterback Sam Darnold does historically check the ball down at a top 10 rate in the NFL. Last year alone, Aaron Jones was his running back, and Aaron Jones, despite being nearly 30 years old, ranked top 10 in both running back receptions and targets, and that's while leaving some games. He didn't miss any, leaving some games early. So I think you're getting a player in his prime, literally his prime, in Kenneth Walker entering year 4 in the 4th round of fantasy drafts right now. Like, there's not many better options at the running back position in this range of the draft. I think that you could argue that Kenneth Walker, like, you wouldn't be shocked next year if Kenneth Walker is going in the 2nd round of drafts, or at least I wouldn't be shocked if he does what I think he can do this year, be a 3-down back and be in the red zone often. So I think you're getting a value on him in the 4th round of drafts. Now, if you want to see exactly where I have Kenneth Walker ranked in my top 50 overall rankings, you can check it out. I'm giving it to you completely free. It's linked down below. You can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com, and what it does, it shows you exactly where the best and worst values are. It's all tiered through my top 50 rankings that'll help you dominate the first 4 to 5 rounds of your draft. Arguably, probably are the most important rounds of your draft. You can check it out with that link in the description below. You'll go right here or head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. You just enter your email and I send it to you instantly, and then you don't even have to worry about it. Every single time I update it, you can just check back in and it'll be updated for you weekly throughout the summer. So it'll help you with those first 4 to 5 rounds of your draft. But if you're somebody who takes fantasy really seriously and you want to get all the help for all the rounds, my top 250 overall rankings, all the other draft tools like my must-haves, must-avoids, all the other in-season tools, that the whole goal of this is for you to win your league, have bragging rights over your friends, smack them all around. That's what you could check out the Fantasy Blueprint for. It's what I use in all my drafts, and over 10,000 people are currently using not only last year, but this year as well to dominate their drafts and smack around their friends. You can check it out, link down below as well, or head to jointheblueprint.com. The prices do go up once August comes, and I have limited spots left because of the demand. So if you want to get in, now's the time. And now is the time to be drafting TreVeyon Henderson, because by the time the end of August or early September comes, he's going to be going a lot earlier than he currently is right now in fantasy drafts for a guy who is arguably the most explosive running back in this past year's NFL draft class. I know RJ Harvey was in it. He's also explosive. I know, of course, Ashton Genty probably takes that title, but TreVeyon Henderson is close. This is a dude who has a 19-year-old freshman at Ohio State in the Big Ten, a lot of weight on his shoulders, put up over 1,200 rushing yards. When you factor in his receiving yards, he had over 1,500 total yards as a 19-year-old in the Big Ten and 19 touchdowns. A beast. And then he finished up last year year while competing with another second-round pick in this year's NFL draft, Quinshon Judkins, and he had over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1,000 yards on the ground. When you factor in his receiving yards, the dude put up over 1,300 total yards last year on a very limited amount of touches, barely 150 total touches. And not only was he productive, but he was extremely reliable. Over the last 2 seasons, TreVeyon Henderson has 300 rushing attempts and 0 fumbles, 53 targets, and only 2 drop passes. Not to mention, he is arguably, if not the best pass protector in this class. As Chris Ballard of the Colts said, TreVeyon Henderson might have been as good of a pass protecting back that I've ever seen coming out of college. So you're getting like one of the most explosive players in terms of a yards per touch, can do it on the ground with big plays, can do it in the air, and one of the most reliable, doesn't fumble, doesn't drop passes, can pass protect and not get your quarterback sacked. This dude is a dream for NFL coaches, and that's exactly why the Patriots took him at the top of the 2nd round. And oh yeah, by the way, I've showed this stat a couple of times this offseason. It's from my friend Austin over on Twitter. This is just a crazy stat though. He's the only running back in this draft class and one of the only running backs that we've seen in the past decade to have over 1,000 rushing yards, over 200 receiving yards, and average over 7 yards per carry. Just extremely explosive, extremely dynamic. And now he lands in a Patriots backfield where I think right away he's the most complete running back. Like, you compare him to veterans Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, who do things well. They both have some solid pass catching skills. They just both haven't been able to stay, 1, healthy, and 2, be reliable in both pass protection and receiving, and also on the ground. Those 3 phases where TreVeyon Henderson is really good. Now, don't get me wrong, these guys are veteran running backs, especially Ramondre Stevenson, who is on a decent contract with the Patriots, although a new coaching staff is there. But Stevenson is still a veteran, so I wouldn't be shocked if this is some sort of split backfield for the first month, maybe even 2 of the season, but that's already baked into TreVeyon Henderson's price. And the offense just sets up well for maybe multiple running backs to be involved and be successful, like Mike Vrabel. We know that he likes to run the ball. He ranks 2nd in rush attempts and yards during his time with the Tennessee Titans. We have Josh McDaniels as well here as the new offensive coordinator. He can create, I want to say explosive plays, but he can create an offense that kind of puts the ball in the hands of the best players. That's what he's always really done. And TreVeyon Henderson, maybe the most explosive player in this offense, probably is. Patriots are also building around Drake May as they enter year 2. They had to improve this offensive line. They did that. They got a left tackle with a top 5 overall pick, and they added Morgan Moses in free agency, a proven veteran. They had to improve the pass catchers and playmakers around one Drake May. They did that by adding Stephon Diggs. They got Kyle Williams, a 3rd-round rookie who's a deep threat as well. And then, of course, they get TreVeyon Henderson himself. So all the things they needed to do to make this offense more sustainable, maybe not a top 10 offense in the league, but closer to league average, they kind of did this offseason. And really, the way this is shaping up is TreVeyon Henderson reminds me a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs' rookie year, where like Jahmyr Gibbs, though, was going in the 2nd round of fantasy drafts, but he was clearly an explosive player. Gibbs went as a top 12 overall pick, but just similar archetypes of players, and they're going to be in a backfield with a proven veteran. David Montgomery for Gibbs, Ramondre Stevenson, less proven, but a proven veteran for Henderson. One interesting quote this offseason is that Henderson said he's kind of just been studying James White as a pass catcher, which is interesting because he's also on the Patriots as well. James White, we know what he did, although a different offense and different coaches and all that. We know what this guy did as a receiver every single year, right? You look at this right here. I mean, he had seasons with 72 catches, 87 catches, 56, and 60, despite never being a full-time player. Like Alvin Kamara catches 70 balls a year as a full-time player. James White was a dude seeing like 40% of the snaps doing that. So I bring that up to say that would be pretty cool, right? Because Josh McDaniels had James White for a period of time as well. So that'd be cool if they used him in that way, but also gave him a handful more of snaps on just rushing downs, the early downs, and in pass protection in the 2-minute offense, because he's the best back in this backfield as a pass protector. Now, I mentioned you're not going to be able to get him this late, in my opinion, because right now he goes at the end of the 5th round, and often he falls into the 6th round on fantasy platforms like Yahoo and Sleeper and ESPN. That is an absolute steal right now. Even if he goes into the 5th round, I'm still fine with that. You're getting a guy with so much explosiveness, draft capital, and a very good offensive fit that needs playmakers like Henderson. You're getting him at a relatively cheap price point. So there you have it. These are 5 players who will help you win your fantasy league this year, in my opinion. Be sure to put a star by these players, and also be sure to grab those free top 50 overall rankings. They're linked down below, or you could just head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. Now, if you want to see the 5 running backs that I would bet my house on this year, fingers crossed, knock on wood, I don't lose the home, but if you want to see those 5 running backs I feel that confident in, you can check out this video that recently dropped right here. Be sure to let me know what you think about it in the comments section, and I'll see you all in that video and the next one.